On today's show, we're picking up with part 2, the role of women in the home and the church. We had some good discussion in part 1. We're going to continue the discussion today. It's going to be interesting. We're going to try to get to the bottom of it, right? How do women fit in to the home and to the church? Believe it or not, people are still having conversations of what this looks like, how women fit in. You know what? Let's see if we can get some extra movement on this discussion. Let's talk about it.
Thank you for tuning in. We are Tristan and Michael, and you are listening to Fused, transparent conversations for marriage, family, and relationships. We invite you to join us as we discuss topics that are thought about but not talked about. So tell your friends and family to check us out and join us on all of our social handles as well as our website, fusedmarriages.com.
I'm loving the glasses look. The glasses are complimenting you quite well today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And you look sharp, sir. I like the bold red.
Try to, bold. Yeah, it's 2024, so
Hey, happy 2024.
Step out, do something, do different.
Yep, do different. Hey,
different.
That's a good saying. That should be our saying for the year. Do different, even though that's not grammatically correct. We can.
How you supposed to say it?
Do differently.
See. Y'all just got y'all got an education, English education today.
I'll go with do different.
Do different. That just sound like, you know what I'm doing? Do different.
Does it? Does it sound like
It does.
Okay. Well, we are revisiting a topic that we didn't really get to finish on our last episode, or the one before our recap. So I'll kind of let you introduce it. This is kind of what you conceptualize. So I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah. So hopefully, if you guys haven't seen it, we did an episode at the end of last year, and it's talking about the women's role in the house and in church. That was part 1. If you haven't seen it, check out in the description. You can click the link there to check it out. It'll catch you up to where we're at today. Mm-hmm. So we ran out of time in regards to what we wanted to cover in part 1. So we want to pick it up again in part 2. We think it's that important to really maybe dig a little deeper. We had some additional conversations after the camera stopped. Yeah. So we said, you know what? We need to go on and just kind of continue the conversation. Maybe other people can have, benefit from what we're saying and what we're even questioning or asking as well.
Sure. So that said, please let us know your thoughts as we continue this dialogue. Mm-hmm. I think it's like so many of our programs, I think this is a really important one to talk about, particularly as it regards those that are engaged in the church.
Yeah, and we mentioned the church, right? But people, I would think, either in church or out of church, right? Some people at home are dealing with this, right? May not deal with it in church.
True. That's true.
Could be dealing some of these topics with, we're saying maybe the suppression of women in a way that, it really is not, should be something that should be done, right? And we know what happens in the church. We know what happens at home.
Yeah.
So we think this can, cross both paths, right? If you will. We'll mention a lot of things that maybe happen in church, but I'm pretty sure it definitely happens at home too.
That's true. Yeah. Good.
All right. With that being said, I'll kick it off. We had a few topics that we did cover in part 1. We won't cover those. We talked about the women being the weaker vessel. We had a question mark on that. Not that they are. It was a question mark, right? And we had a discussion in part 1. So if you want to hear that topic, go to part 1 in the description. You can check that out. But what we're going to jump in today is at least pick back up on submission, right? And really, we're going to jump to the idea of at least a question is submission. Is there, and let me rephrase that. Is there a hierarchy, right, in regards to how we should operate as a family? That is a question. I can go first on my response, but that is a question that maybe some people have, right? Mm-hmm. Have inquired with each other or other families, or kind of just wondered, right? Is there a hierarchy? And I'll give my answer. I love to get your thoughts on it because I think the perspectives matter, right? So me as a male, I give it from my perspective. I have my lens that I look at it, which hopefully is fairly accurate, but it could be wrong or different. Sure. And you have your lens and experience, life experiences that you actually have as well. So my perspective that there is a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And the hierarchy is, it's almost like, in my opinion, God gave us a template, right? Mm-hmm. I think as a husband, and I'm going to talk about just from the men's standpoint, I will not touch on the women as much. I'm going to say that for you. As a husband, I think God puts a lot of responsibility on us men, right? Mm-hmm. Some of us men, we love the title. We don't like the responsibility, or we ignore the responsibility, right? Because what I believe is that God has appointed men, let's say men in this case, talking about husbands, as the head of the household. We put that in quotes, head of the household, right? I think there's a template of why he says that, because part of it is that, you know what, us as husbands, we're supposed to be that template for what God looks like, right? And then people want to use the submission part, men want to use the submission part as really kind of the verb, but they don't understand really the noun that goes with, okay, what does it really look like to be a husband? My role is to be God-like to you, to my children. I'm that template until at least my children, right, get to the age they can understand what God is supposed to be. I'm your covering template of what, and on earth, of what God's supposed to be doing within you spiritually, right? So with that being said, I believe that there's a hierarchy of saying, okay, if I'm as a husband designed to be God-like, which I'm literally willing to lay down my life for you, my thoughts, my ideas, my cares for what you need, or what my kids need, what my family needs, then that's, to me, that is a good person, or a good way of looking at, okay, this is the head of household. This is what, hey, the hierarchy looks like, right? And I know that can be controversial, because we can go a lot of different ways on that. I will stop there and let you kind of chime in on your thoughts on that.
Okay. I think you said a lot of really interesting things, and some really important things. I think one of the things that I really like that you said is you distinguished what it means to lay down somebody's life. I think a lot of times when we talk through that, we only think about death. Like, we think like, I would be willing to die for you. But life can be that kind of that ongoing thing. So it's not necessarily just death. It's, am I willing, you said, to lay down like thoughts or goals or, wants in any given moment. So I think that that's a distinction that people don't necessarily make when they think about what it is to sacrifice one's life, particularly when it comes to marriage. I think we think about it when we talk about our children, like, I'd be willing to lay down my life in terms of my time or my want. I'll get up in the middle of the night and tuck my son in if he's scared, or I will forego, going on this trip to put my kids into such and such camp, or whatever it is. But when it comes to my spouse, we don't necessarily look at what it is to give one's life, even at the altar. Like, okay, through sickness and health, check. They're not going to get really sick. They're always going to be relatively healthy. Through rich or poor, we're never going to be really broke. Like, we'll be okay. So, but when it comes to those things, then there's the gasp, like well, now it looks differently. So when we're talking about what it is to submit and what it is to be the head of household, I think the ideal example, and I think this is where it gets sticky for me, maybe some women that are listening, maybe some men, I don't know. But I think it gets sticky when we start talking about how submission is actualized in church and home and community and whatever. Like, in work, you call it like, oh, they're being insubordinate. Like, how, what is that? And I think that there are, micro adjustments based on household, based on personality, based on ability, based on trust. And I think so much of it is really trusting, because I think the ultimate biblical example, and we talked about this off camera, is, wives, that we do submit. That's the ultimate, but that was disturbed from the beginning, from the garden, the idea that the husband covered the wife, that was destroyed with Adam and Eve. So this idea is something that we are striving for, but it doesn't mean that it is ultimately the easy thing to do, or that it is the always actualized thing to do, because if so was done, then Adam would have covered his wife in the garden, and he didn't. He blamed his wife in the garden. He didn't say, you know what, I messed up. It was me. He said, no, it was her. She's the problem. And I think from then to now, this idea of submission, the men foregoing responsibility, but wanting accolades, like saying like, okay, well, it's not me, but you still have to do everything that I say. And that's the way often it's been actualized for at least women that I know, and things that I have seen, it has not been what you are saying. And I'm blessed to have you cover, but a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people have that, yeah, I'm going to pay the bills, and that's the ultimate covering. That's the ultimate, I pay the bills and you do everything I say. Or I pay the bills and you're responsible for this laundry list of things, and I'm responsible for going to work and coming home. And so the way that it happens in homes and in churches and in communities and so on is not this idea of what I think the original God idea of submission was, where it is, I'll lay down my life for my wife. Mm-hmm. And I think that therein lies the problem, because I don't know that many men understand what it really is to lay down one's life, but they still want the woman to submit.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Like I said, I'll try to speak from the male perspective, at least what I've seen, what I understand, and how I would maybe try to just put some different insight on it. I think, my role as a man or as a husband is to attempt, right, to create an environment that you can thrive in.
Sure.
Right. That's my ultimate goal. And is that easy? No. Is that come with sacrifice? Yes. Right. That comes with a lot of different things, with me trying to accomplish that so you can thrive in. And then with the hopefully then that, you do see me as the head. Right. If you see me pushing to try to create that environment, even in my flawed state, it makes it hopefully easier to tolerate maybe when I do fall short, which I am human. And I think us as men, we often, and I'm used from a biblical standpoint, but I think it can apply to whatever. But, when the scripture says for God so loved, right, the world, right, and we kind of picture or place our love into our wives or to our families that he gave, right? And a lot of times we don't put love and gave in the same context, right? I'm saying us as men, husbands. Can't speak from the wife standpoint of that. Whenever we're loving you, we should be giving something, right? I mean, that's part of that is giving up something, right? God gave his son. So go ahead and try to, meet that. Not saying you have to give up your son or your thing, but we have to give up your time. Yeah, we have to give up some of your thoughts. You give up, even if you're right, we have to give that up sometimes. Yes, right. That's that, and that shows, I think, in various ways that my love is real, right? If I'm willing to do that, and that's hard to do. I'm not gonna say I'm a template or I know how to do it or I get it right 100% of the time, but if that is my target, you're going to see something in me differently than maybe what you've seen everybody else is dealing with, right? All right, so the whole idea, I think, if you're going to be a good husband and you're going to incorporate submission into part of your relationship of how you see your household should be ran, it should be, giving has to be part of that. Without giving, I think it's going to be hard for submission to even be used in a way, at least in the context that we think it should be used in a proper way.
Yeah, I think you said something really interesting even when we were off camera. You distinguished between the idea of giving to and giving up. And I think when we join together, we have to give up something. It's not just like, because I think sometimes we say, well, I gave you this thing. I gave you this gift. I bought you a car, or I bought you a bag. Like, you should be happy. And there's no, what did it cost me outside of the purchase? Because obviously our purchases are equivalent to the amount of life we're able to give up, right? So if we make $7 an hour and it costs you, 30 hours, then that's the amount that this bag cost wasn't just monetary, it was life. And so to equate, I'm giving up an amount of my life for you, and that life extends monetarily. It extends for my will, like what I want to watch on TV versus what you want to watch on TV, or what I want to buy for the house versus what you want to buy for the house. So there should be this giving and taking and understanding what that means in terms of what I'm giving up to make sure that you're here. But I think from even what women experience from a societal perspective, as we're talking about what happens in the house and how submission is reflected in the household, we also have to look at what happens in the world and in the places and the spaces that exist outside the home, because in those, in that, women have also had to kind of be forced to, quote unquote, submit to a system that doesn't necessarily honor or give to them. And that's from how I've studied, that's where even the feminist movement was born out of this idea of I'm pressing against the thumb being on me because my rights are limited and what I'm being offered is limited as a woman. And we still have those conversations. Like even when I remember when Hillary Clinton was going to be president or was, up for being president of the United States, and the conversation was still centered around her gender. It was still about, yeah, but she's a woman versus, well, these are her qualifications, regardless of political ideology. It's still something that we talk about. We're still talking about women being the first. This is the first woman to do ... And so we have to look at it from a reflective standpoint of why now in this season are we still talking about the gender of the woman being before her in a negative sense. Like, I don't think that there's anything wrong with celebrating being a woman or even being a man, but the idea that now this is a limiting attribute. And that's what, when we have conversations about submission, it's so often equated to now you're limited. Now it's not that you're covered, like what you're saying. It's not that now you're being looked after or you're being protected. It's now you're actually being exposed, and there's something that's innately wrong. There's something that you can't achieve or that you cannot be based on gender. And I think that that's what happens in the home as well, or in the church, that based on your gender, you are not able to, and not even able in terms of like the office, like you don't have the mental capacity or the emotional bandwidth or whatever it is to achieve. Only I do because I'm a man. And then that's what we're fighting against amongst one another. It's capability.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say we are different, right? As men and women for the most part, right?
Yeah.
The attributes of a man are typically different from the attributes of a woman, typically, right? I think the extension of what you were just saying about dealing with outside of the home, if we can get the home part right, maybe some of that will start filtering out once you get outside the home. But I think because of the home part is so skewed and messed up, and women should be in the kitchen and men should be doing this and this, that, and the other, you do what then that just transfers from what I'm seeing and noticing outside to the world, right? To the workplace, to wherever you're at, to what you can and what you can't be. With that being said, I'm just going to go back to at least the initial question of what we were talking about initially was about the hierarchy, right? And just so we can, and maybe we come to understand, maybe we don't, but like in my mind, hierarchy is necessary. How do you see, is it necessary? So let me say this, without hierarchy, I believe you get chaos.
Anarchy.
You get anarchy, right? Everybody's trying to rule. Everybody's trying to submit, whatever it is. Everybody, like there's no definition of how things are able to operate. And I can use the example of we talking about, a CEO or going to a business and you have an experience with a bad manager. It doesn't mean you need a manager to go to the new place. You just had a bad manager, maybe 2 or 3, some of us. You know what I mean? Had bad experiences with managers. But it doesn't negate the fact that a good manager is needed to guide. A good shepherd is needed to lead people to a direction, right? If we're looking at a managerial kind of role, same thing. I look at it with a household or with good leadership or with, say, a husband, is that the hierarchy, in my opinion, is definitely necessary in the context of that. You know what? That person's leading from the right heart, right position, right mindset, even in their flawed state.
Yeah, I can.
Your voice got high when you said that.
Yeah.
I said that. People are like kind of question me, say, yeah. But anyway, go ahead, son.
It's because you said the manager part. So if I am to kind of take a corporate example, I think that it is important. Like there are certain industries that can be run with co-CEOs. But I think that just for us to be equal, to say that we're equal in this sense, what is the gifting? Like what distinguish? Who makes the final call? I think that the ultimate biblical example is certainly like, sure, like we referenced earlier, yeah, ideally the man would be capable, mentally, emotionally. They'll have an amount of emotional intelligence. They'd have an amount of understanding and empathy. And so that would be my ideal example. So that somebody can operate in the capacity of CEO and somebody's operating in the capacity of COO and somebody's, operating in the capacity of CFO and all of these, obviously, is, even though I named 3 different roles, we're talking about a husband and spouse, but that you would be operating in the area of your gifting. And I don't personally have a problem if that lands on your shoulders if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But for me, a better example might be like a government system, like we talked about anarchy and hierarchy. If we look at, a lot of monarchies throughout history, there was always kind of an overthrow of this. Not always, but you look at bad leadership, people want to have a voice. They want to be heard. They want to be considered. Even if it's like, okay, the king's going to make this decision, they have to take into account, how does this decision affect everybody? And so conversely, if you look at a republic or democracy or whatever, where we have multiple branches of government, and that allows for a system of checks and balances where you might have veto power as the president, but you have to bring that information over to Congress, and there are votes that happen, and so the weight varies among these different branches, so that nobody has ultimate power. I think it's the axiom, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So thinking, okay, does this mean absolute power? Because I think a lot of times what happens in marriage and in society and in community, and when we think about the word submission, it becomes a power position. You have power over me and I have no voice. And that's so often and so frequently that happens in the church and the home, as I've seen it as a woman, is that now I have to be silent in the home because you're the man and you make the rules, as opposed to there's a system of checks and balances where certainly you could be president and I can be House of Representatives and the Senate, I can be it all, or whatever, just thinking about it in political terms because I like politics, but considering what that looks like if we actually were to operate in a system that considered both people, and what happens when we are partners, real partners, when one person really is looking out. And in a lot of political systems, it isn't that. And in a lot of households, unfortunately, it isn't that. Somebody is disgruntled because they don't feel considered, and somebody isn't covering, and they're frustrated or resentful. So I'm going on and on about that. What are your thoughts?
I was listening. I was trying to just contemplate all things you were saying. It sounds like, and this is me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when the word submission is used, hurt is also tied to it.
Yes.
Like they're almost like you can't separate the two. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be hard to have a discussion around it with the hurt tied to it, because I don't think the true word of submission is where, was intended to have hurt tied to it.
I agree.
And in order to have, I think, maybe some healing or some understanding or even greater discussion, we got to figure out how to untie that.
It's really a good observation.
Just how can we, and it's like, it's not a one-time discussion. It's not but bringing some awareness of saying, okay, if I have to submit, whether it's to a manager or to a husband, whatever it is, right? I have to submit to something. Because even as culturally, we had to submit. We got some pain that goes around with that, right? Over the 400 years that we've kind of come through. We like, what? I ain't bound to nobody mentality, right? As a culture, we have that, right? Because it's hurt tied to how it was used. And I think similarly in our marriages, right? I think in women in particular, they hear that word and there's pain that's been tied to that, or hurt that's been tied to that. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how to answer that, how to untie that. But it's a serious discussion that needs to be kind of understood maybe a little bit.
I think that's a great observation. I think there is a lot of pain historically tied to submission, and even currently tied to submission, how we have to deal, as a Black woman in particular, have to deal with microaggressions and have to deal with tight labels. Like, okay, what kind of Black woman are you, quote unquote? What kind of wife is she going to be? Is she this or is she that? And so I think that part of that healing is having conversations like this, is acknowledging that it exists, and then trying to do something about it. I think that that's saying like, okay, this exists in marriage. for example, as we're talking about here. Okay, the word submission has been a term of abuse in marriage. How do we make that for our marriage not be it? Because maybe that's the only thing that we can do is say in our home, what does that look like? And then talk to other people about what it might look like for their home. And then we have those conversations that bleed out into the streets, as you were referencing earlier. And I think the same is true as we talk about women in the church. Like, there is a lot of pain, and, anger is, the other side of hurt. Right. So looking at like, okay, if we were to have these kinds of conversations in churches where we were heard and where there was an opportunity to do something different, and that opportunity was actualized, then the idea of what it looks like to be a submissive wife, quote unquote, or to operate in the church at large, then we would be able to really see us what the word love and give and honor and submit really mean.
No, that's pretty powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to kind of transition a little bit, if you don't mind, and I'll get my thoughts on. I know there's been discussions in some circles, right? We're talking about just women involvement in church or in the home. There's this term, and it's typically Christianese. You kind of turn me onto that word, Christianese term, Proverbs 31 woman, right? So, and from what I've heard, I haven't experienced this personally, but I went and read it and tried to understand it from the context standpoint. And when I read it, I said, okay, that's a good template for someone to strive for. That's without anybody digging in it too much and kind of pointing me in any kind of direction. That's what I took out of it. I said, hey, this is a good template, okay, for a woman. In this case, it's talking about a woman, but just it's a goal. It's a mark, right? Of hey, can a woman achieve these things? Can she be this? But to counter that, there's been, and people love Proverbs 31 woman. I see shirts about it, this, that, and the other, support it, but others don't. If you don't mind, as we close and kind of give some thoughts about, okay, not the negativity, I don't want to end on a negative note, but give people understanding, okay, of maybe some of the things that need to pull from, and maybe in trying to move beyond the negative. I don't think the Bible is meant to be negative, but too many times people have made it like, if you ain't this, right, then you know what, you ain't what you need to be. And I don't think the Bible is to do this. It's supposed to be pointing back at you, right? First, right? What type of husband are you being in this case? Are you a husband that can, fulfill this woman with all she's doing? Are you capable? Right? Is you desirable in that way that she's doing a lot? So, but anyway, just talk about that a little bit. At least from the other side. A lot of people don't know, aren't aware, and may need to be, just be healed from the aspect of what that means. Yeah.
The Proverbs 31 woman is a whole show all by itself. But in brief, Proverbs 31 is a chapter in the Bible. The chapter is the 31st chapter of Proverbs. And what you said was accurate, that it is a goal. It is something that you shoot for. And it has also been used, as we talk about women and submission and abuse, it has been used to show women what they are not. And even by women, showing women, you should check these boxes. But if you look at the passage itself, it's really a mother talking to her son and telling her all the things that he would want her to have in a wife. Just like I would do for my son. I want you to have this and this and this, and she's this and she's this and she's this and she's this. It doesn't necessarily mean that one woman can encompass all of these things, not even simultaneously, because it is a lot of things that this Proverbs 31 woman is all at once. And so what happens so often for Christians and for believers that are trying and striving to be this Proverbs 31 woman is you feel defeated because there are so many things that you are not. And so often the church has said, often men, this is the kind of woman that you should want. And so women try to be that thing, unable to attain or to be, and then feel, I'm not good enough. And men look at women and say, well, you're not good enough because you're not all of these things. And so it's been abused. But as you said, I don't think that that was the intention of the Bible at all. As a matter of fact, Jesus talks to the Pharisees and the Sadducees because they're using text to beat people up and tell them that they're not good enough. And so he comes to say that this is no longer the measure. Right. As a matter of fact, he says love is the measure. And to kind of wrap it up for me is I think that love is the measure. I think when we talk about submission, when we talk about biblical practices, when we talk about goals in marriage, love is the measure. And the more we love, the more we give. The more opportunity I want to give to my sister because of how much I love her. The more opportunity I want to give to my brother because I love him. The more I want to give to my children. The more I want to give to my spouse. The more I want to give to my community because my love is greater than even their fault. It's greater than their gender. It's greater than where they might go wrong. It's greater than the offense. It's my love that I have for them. So that's ultimately what I think submission is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be mutual submission, you to Christ, me to you, so that we show one another the kind of love that is divine.
Drop the mic on that right there. Hey, love is it. Hey, if you're doing any kind of correction, any kind of discussion, any kind of conflict, even like, you know what, people, like you said, use the Bible, this, that, and the other. And if it's not drawing people to love, we should question it, right? We should question it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. We would love to hear from you on this topic. We appreciate your insights. I appreciate you for even considering this topic. But we definitely want to hear from you. Make sure that you connect with us on all of our socials, as well as checking out our website, fusedmarriages.com, for more content and resources. Let's talk about it.